Have you ever had the delightful experience of remembering an old book or an old series that you read maybe 20, 25, 30, 40 years ago and thinking, oh, that book really shaped who I am today, or that series that I read really made me who I am, really shaped my thoughts, gave me lots of things to dream and imagine in the world, gave me hours of enjoyment. I want to go back and reread it. And then you go back and reread it and you go, oh, that didn't age well. Today, I'd like to talk to you about some books that had that effect on me. Let's talk. Welcome, I'm Amy, and I am starting a new adventure in talking about books on YouTube. If you'd like to join me, hit the subscribe button, give this video a like, and click the notification bell if you're into that sort of thing. When I was preparing for the last video that I did about my favorite mysteries, go watch that if you haven't, I started to think about books that I have just read over the years, over the decades. And I realized that a lot of the people who I watch on YouTube who talk about books happen to be people who are maybe 25 to 30 years younger than I am. I know there are lots of people my age and significantly older who talk about books on YouTube, but at least at the moment my favorite channels tend to be people who are quite a bit younger than I am. They're young enough to be my children, and when they talk about things like older protagonists in a book, they're talking about people who are maybe 30, and I'm like, I could have kids who were 30. That doesn't feel like an older protagonist to me. To me, an older protagonist is like 70. And when they talk about how something didn't age well, they're often talking either about like a classic that they had to read for school and they go, that was of its time, but didn't come into the modern era with us. Or they're talking about something they read 5 years ago that no longer serves them. Fine, all of that is fair. But these people who I'm sort of mentally interacting with as I watch their videos are people who are right now the age that I was when I read these books that I loved so much. And now, 30 years later, I'm thinking, gosh, that did not age well. Let me talk to you first of all about two series by the author Joan Hess. I started reading Joan Hess books when I was in my 20s, recommended by my college roommate, and I absorbed these. She wrote two primary series, one about a detective named Arlie Hanks and one about a bookseller named Claire Malloy. Both of these were sort of in the cozy mystery vein, and Joan Hess's writing style was considered very unique, and her voice was so strongly in the place where she wrote, which was Arkansas, that people would talk about her writing as being like, she's going to be the next Mark Twain. I read that several times, and I loved the way the books combined humor and heart and things that were just a little bit too grimy to be in the city, that you had to be in the country for. And how she took pot shots at everyone. Nobody was safe from Joan Hess's sarcasm. And she expressed that both in her descriptions of the characters as well as in things that the characters said and did. And there were people who just went about living their lives as if their own life was the only thing that mattered. And then somebody else would come along and make some kind of a sarcastic remark, and everything just goes haywire from there. Each murder mystery had its own character, its own uniqueness, but the story arcs of the two series were also very important. And the way that the characters grew and developed over the time was really important to me. The way that these books shaped me was that they really gave me a sense of how women could be sarcastic, women could be biting, women could be funny. Because I had been brought up in an environment where women were to be sort of docile and submissive, and to come out with your actual thoughts through your mouth with words was just not on. And so I loved how those books shaped me and gave me a sense that I could really observe the world just like these characters did, just like Arlie Hanks did, just like Claire Malloy did. I could look at the world, I could have my own thoughts about the world, and then I could shape the world that I lived in according to my own views and not just what was like hierarchically placed on top of me. It was wonderful. I credit so much of how I think about the world to how I read to my 20s and even my earliest 30s reading these books. So in the last couple of years, I was thinking about these books again, and I was like, I want to go back and reread them. And here's what didn't age well for me. The main thing that I noticed right off the bat, having a period of, say, 25 years when I hadn't read them, was that Joan Hess's writing was very critical of women. And I never saw that before. I only saw, like I said, the part where women get to say what they think. But she was very critical of women who want to take control of their lives in a way that bothers men. The characters, if they had been written in the 2010s, would have been, I'm not like other girls characters. That's not how I would describe these women characters, but they hold themselves aloof from everything, including and especially the feminist movement, which gave them the freedom to be who they were. Joan Hess is no longer with us. She passed away almost 10 years ago, and she was dearly beloved in the mystery writers community forever. She supported women. She supported the work of women mystery writers, and I know that the way she lived was very empowered, and I wish that I understood why, when I go back and read these, I see so much hatred of women in them. There is also an enormous amount of fat shaming and really horrible treatment of one character who is fat. And as a listener from the beginning to the podcast maintenance phase, I can't unsee that. And it's just horrendous the way that she writes fat people. So do I still want to read these? Did I continue on? In this case, no. And by the way, I'm answering these same questions about each of the 3 sets of series that I'm talking to you about today. So I don't think I can go back and reread them. I really don't. I think that I can be grateful for what those books gave me. I can be grateful for the connection with my college roommate that extended past college through shared love of books. I can be grateful for the writing style, which is very incisive and very clear and often comically, sarcastically funny. But no, I'm not gonna go back and read them, because I don't want to read about how women can only be empowered if they hate other women. And I really don't want to read people being horrible to fat people. So I won't be rereading them. Have you read the Joan Hess books? What do you think? Did they hit you the same way as they did me? I think that there are probably a lot of different views on this, and I'm curious about yours. The second former fave that didn't age well for me is The Hollows. It's a series by Kim Harrison. It is still ongoing. It's been ongoing for many years. And I started reading it at the recommendation of a friend when I was in my 30s. And these books really took me to a place that I had never been and that doesn't exist. This is an urban fantasy set in present day-ish Cincinnati and a place near Cincinnati on the other side of the river in Kentucky, I believe, called The Hollows. And it's an urban fantasy 40 years after a pandemic has wiped out a massive amount of the population, allowing folks like witches and vampires and werewolves and some others to come out of the woodwork and to not be affected by the pandemic and so be able to survive and become part of functioning society. The way that this series shaped me is it gave me a place to go to. There's something about Kim Harrison's writing that takes me to the place that she describes in a way that no other author does for me. And I don't know what it is about her writing style that does that, but I know what that city looks like. I know what that urban fantasy version of Cincinnati looks like. I know what the character's home looks like. I know all of those places, although I've only read about them. And the other places that they go to that are outside of the dimension that we live in, those are a little bit less clear, but they're still beautifully described. So the story that took me on a whole journey through 14 novels and now ongoing is one that I thought recently I would like to go back and start at the beginning and give myself that same enjoyment all over again. It's now like 20 years later since I first read that whole series. I was so dedicated to it that when a new book would come out, I would go back and reread the series leading up to it, at least the book before it. And if it was time to sit down and read a new Hollows book, dinner wasn't getting cooked. It was really a big deal to me. And I just appreciate so much how in a time in my life when I was so busy, I was raising young children, I was working, I was a single mom, this book could take me into a whole different world and a whole different set of lives and just hold me there for a while. I loved it so much for that. But when I went back recently and started to reread the series from the beginning, I realized that there was one particular element that troubled me now that didn't trouble me back then. And it's the way the author handles the issue of queerness right from the start. There's this idea of a bisexual woman vampire who's part Asian and who is always fighting her impulse to bite and do other things with anybody she meets. and she's an important side character. And she has a trajectory throughout the arc of the series that is so powerful that when the end came, the initial end of the series, Kim Harrison had intended to close off the series at a certain point, and then it was so popular that she had to revive it, and it's continuing on today. But in that initial ending, I just remember sobbing because this character, who had been written just flat as paper, there was some biphobia involved in this, the way she was described. There was some just a flat, slapdash, casually racist description of being Asian. There was, if you're a vampire, you're a lesbian. There was this idea that to want to be with another woman is to be violent. It was just it seemed very slapdash. And this was the first book in the series. By the time it came to the end, this particular character had gone through such an arc, and her character was so complex and so deep that she became my favorite character. So to answer the question of would I reread the series, honestly, I think that I would. I think that these books kind of live in my head enough that I would reread them, but I don't know. Having read the beginning and knowing exactly what the start of this world is, I don't think I want to go back and read that really flat bit that I think can be just pushed to the side. I might start about halfway through the series and just pick books here and there that have story arcs that I enjoy. So I sort of yes and no. Now, for those of you who are Hollows fans, I have a question. Are you continuing on with the revived series, or do you feel like it came to an appropriate end when it ended? I'm kind of in between. I like the new series for what it is, but I honestly have a problem with how the main character has been paired up in the revived series. One of the things I really liked about the main character in the original series is that she was absolutely nonsense with men, and just every book was a different man, or sometimes two or three. And it really made the series have a certain quirkiness that I liked. And in the revived / ongoing series, she is paired up with just one person, and I don't like him, and I don't like her with just one person. So I struggle to read those, but I don't know. What do you think? Should I keep going? Finally, and surprisingly, I want to talk to you about the Meg Langslow series. If you are one of those folks who has been along for the ride since I started making these videos here a few months ago, thank you very much. You are one of the people who has heard me talk almost incessantly about the Meg Langslow series by Donna Andrews. It is a very long-running series. We're on to book, 40 or something, and they have been sort of my comfort read and comfort listen anytime I needed to just escape. It's a cozy mystery series set in Virginia in a small town, and I think of it as sort of like a town that is present day, but it's a little bit out of time. It's its own little world and its own, I don't want to say it's magical realism because there's no magical realism in there, but it just has a bit of a flavor of it's just not quite real. And it's always given me a way to escape. I've appreciated the predictability in a good way of the plot sequences. In a chaotic week, for instance, I can read a Donna Andrews book about Meg Langslow, and I can understand at this percent of the book, this is going to happen. At this percent of the book, this is going to happen. At this percent of the book, this is going to happen. As she has gone much farther into the series, that has varied somewhat, and that has kept my interest. She's also talked about kind of deeper themes, and I really appreciated that. This is a little bit of a different kind of a thing, because the next thing I want to talk about is what hasn't aged well, and I would say it's sort of the opposite in this case. The earlier books, they have their own sort of quirks, and then as you get into the series, she sort of keeps up with the times in terms of social issues that are important at any given time when she is writing that particular year's book. And I appreciate that about her. She's keeping this sort of insulated, isolated community, but there's connections to the real world that we live in. The latest book that I read included some things that I really thought were awful. She talked about young women using terms that I'm not going to repeat here, but the main character and several of the others referred to these two young women who were sort of side characters in this particular storyline. They were young brides-to-be. And she talked about them with such cruelty that I was genuinely shocked. I had not seen any evidence of that type of cruelty in her writing about other people, about any character at all. It was ghastly, the cruelty that she used. She described them in sexual terms. She described them using the language of an eating disorder to make fun of them. I was horrified. I was genuinely horrified. And I kept reading to see if it would change and if somebody would come in and point out that this was wrong. And nobody did. None of the characters did. They just kept heaping verbal abuse on and towards these young women. Now, the young women were not created to be likable characters, but none of what was said about them was about the unlikability of their character. It was about their appearance. It was about their supposed behavior. It was about their supposed relationship with food. It was horrific. So much so that I have not been able to go back and listen to or read any of the earlier books since. That may pass for me, but I was so genuinely horrified by this that it reshaped my whole experience of having read these other books. These books had been really a safe place for me to go. And they're not anymore. It was that significant. And I wondered if I was the only one who thought this. I went on to Goodreads to find out. And I haven't seen anybody, at least on the Goodreads reviews, talk about this particular phenomenon. Some people talked about, the predictability of the series being a disadvantage. As I've said, in my case, that's something I look for, so it's fine for me. But this verbal abuse of women throughout the entire book, it was shocking to me. And I don't know if I'll be able to go back and reread and re-listen to any more of these Meg Langslow books that have been my constant companion for now 25 years. It's that one thing was so horrible. I don't know. What do you think? Have you read them? Have you read this book that I'm talking about? Do you know what I'm talking about? Tell me your thoughts. Did you have a different perspective? Do I need to revisit it? I just don't know. It didn't age well for me. All right, we've come to the end of our video, and I have a question for you. Do you have anything classic, modern, any genre that you once loved and that now you think, no, that didn't age well? Tell me all about it. And I'm so glad you're here. I can't wait to see you again soon. Bye-bye.